Hello, algebra fans. All right, today we're going to be doing absolute value equations. Absolute value equations. So I know you all work with absolute value. In fact, we did that towards the beginning of the year, right? If I said the absolute value, or actually what's the definition, if you all know, is the distance from zero. So that means it's always going to be positive. So if I said like the absolute value of -3 is 3, the absolute value of positive 3 is also 3. Don't tell me that the absolute value of 3 is -3. It's always positive value. It's distance from zero. Okay, so we're going to actually be using equations now. So let's give you a basic example here. If I have absolute value of x is equal to 3. The question I'm going to ask you is, what values can x be? If x is 3, that works, right? Because the absolute value of 3 is 3. But x can also be -3. Because the absolute value of -3 is also positive 3. So the solution to this problem is x equals 3 and -3. So there are two answers to this. Okay, most of the time there are going to be two answers to the problem. So the setup for this is as follows. So let's just do another basic one. Absolute value of x equals 7. The setup is I take whatever's inside the absolute value and I set it equal to positive of this number and negative of this number. So obviously it's a pretty basic answer. You can also write x equals plus or minus 7, and that would be a correct answer also. I don't care how you write it. All right, so you basically take what's inside the absolute value and you set it equal to positive. So you set inside absolute value equal to positive and negative of the other side. Okay, it's basically what it is. Now, there are a couple of rules you have to talk about here. First of all, before you can set that equal to positive and negative of the other side, is you must isolate. You must isolate the absolute value. All right, it has to be all by itself. So you're going to do everything just like normal algebra to move things over. Let me give you just a quick example here. If I have 2 times the absolute value of x minus 3 is equal to 11. You need to isolate that absolute value. So you're going to, whatever you need to do, you're going to do your adding and subtracting first, and then you're going to do your multiplying and dividing second. So first is add and subtract. Second step is multiply and divide. So for example, this is like 2, well, this is 2 absolute value of x minus 3. So the first thing you're going to do is I'm going to add 3 to both sides, because you're going to do your adding and subtracting. And remember, I'm trying to isolate the absolute value of x. So you do not touch the inside of that absolute value of x, the inside at all, nothing. Okay, so I get 2 times absolute value of x is equal to 14. And then this is 2 times absolute value of x, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I get absolute value of x equals 7. At this point, now I set inside the absolute value equal to positive 7 and negative 7. So those are actually my two answers. X equals plus or minus 7. Okay? So let's put some stuff inside the absolute value. Put some numbers in there. So if I have 2 times the absolute value of x minus 3 minus 5 equals 11. You do not distribute, I repeat, you do not distribute that 2 inside that absolute value. This is like locked. You do not touch that. It's like treated almost like a big X. If you think about it, it's like saying 2x, where x is that absolute value, minus 5 equals 11. Okay, you don't touch that absolute value. And basically what you do is now you would say, oh, I would add 5 to both sides, and then I divide by 2. So let's just actually get rid of that, what I just did there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 5 to both sides. Okay, this absolute value, x minus 3, needs to be in the problem right at the end. Okay, and then you're going to split it up with positive and negative. But you never, ever touch that. So we're going to add 5 to both sides, and we get 2 absolute value of x minus 3 is equal to 16. Okay, again, I have not touched the absolute value. I'm going to divide both sides by 2, and I get absolute value of x minus 3 is equal to 8. Now it's isolated. Okay, that's isolated. There's nothing outside of it. There's nothing added to it. There's nothing multiplied by it. It is literally absolute value of x minus 3 equals a number. At this point right now, now you take away the absolute value, and you would say you're going to set up two problems. X minus 3 equals positive 8, and x minus 3 equals negative 8. So there it is. There's your positive and there's your negative 8. And then you have two problems to solve. So you're going to add 3 to both sides. So x equals 11. And you're going to add 3 to both sides here. And watch your signs, guys. If you need to, use your calculator. I don't care, but don't get it wrong. So x equals negative 5. So those are your two answers. And again, I don't care how you write it in the answer blank. If you want to write x equals 11, comma, negative 5, that's great. Okay? So once, just to kind of review what I just did, I'm basically solving for that absolute value. I never touched that absolute value. That absolute value is right here. And it carried all the way down. Carried all the way down. And your last step is you break it up. If you distribute, it's going to be wrong. All right, so let's do another example. Okay, if I have 1/2 times the absolute value of 2x minus 4, close the absolute value, minus 6 is equal to 2. Okay, so once again, this right here is never to be touched until the very, not quite the last step, but it's not to be touched until you get to where you have to break it up. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is, remember, you always do your adding and subtracting first. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So I get 1/2 times absolute value of 2x minus 4 is equal to 8. Okay, again, I am not touching that 2x minus 4. I am going to multiply by the reciprocal. It's like saying, here, look on the side here. It's like if I had 1/2 x equals 8. How do I solve for x? I multiply by the reciprocal. Don't divide by 1/2. That's messy. Multiply by the reciprocal. So you get x equals 16. So it's the same thing here. I'm going to multiply this by the reciprocal and multiply this by 2 also. So that cancels, and I get absolute value of 2x minus 4 equals 16. Okay, once again, I have not touch that absolute value. It is still intact. Okay? everything is gone around it. There is nothing on the side of it. There's nothing added and subtracted over here. It is all by itself. Once it is all by itself, then I can set up my two problems. So now I have 2x minus 4 equals 16 and 2x minus 4 equals negative 16. I have two problems to solve. So I add 4 to both sides. So 2x equals 20 divided by 2, x equals 10. And this one, add 4 to both sides. Again, watch your signs. Make sure you add correctly. 2x equals negative 12. Divide both sides by 2, x equals negative 6. So my answer to this problem is 10 and negative 6. And you can always check your work. If you have time at the end of a quiz, you can always plug a 10 in there. If I plug a 10 into this problem here, it'd be 2 times 10 is 20. 20 minus 4 is 16. 1/2, and the absolute value of 16 is 16. 1/2 of 16 is 8. 8 minus 6 is 2. Same thing with negative 6. 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. Negative 12 minus 4 is negative 16. The absolute value of negative 16 is 16. 1/2 times 16 is 8. 8 minus 6 is 2. So I just checked my answer. So again, follow these rules. Never touch the absolute value until this point right here, and then you set up two different equations. Okay, so you're going to have two answers for most of these problems. If you don't have two answers for these problems, and I've seen that happen so many times, the whole thing is wrong. I'm not even going to give you any credit, because that means you don't even know the difference between absolute value equations and just a regular equation. Okay, once you see that absolute value equation, you better start thinking you're going to have two answers for this. Okay, let's talk about special cases. If I have the absolute value of x is equal to negative 5, I want you guys to think, what can x be now, where when you plug it into that absolute value equation, you get negative 5. So if I plug in a 5 into there, well, what's the absolute value of 5? It's 5. Well, what happens if I plug in a negative 5? Well, I get 5. Is there any way to take the absolute value of something and get negative 5? No, there's no way to do it. It's impossible. That's the whole point of absolute value. It gives you a positive answer. It's the distance from 0. So this is the deal. If, and I'm going to write this out, if after isolation, the absolute value equals a negative number, then it's NSB, no solution, baby. Okay, that is so important. But that's only after you isolated it. And this is what I mean by that. If I have negative 2 times the absolute value of x is equal to negative 10. Okay, if you say there's no solution to this because you say, hey, there's a negative right here, okay, it's wrong. The first thing you have to do is you have to divide, you have to isolate that absolute value. So I'm going to divide by negative 2 first. And I get absolute value of x equals positive 5. Now I actually have two answers. X equals negative 5 and x equals positive 5. Okay, so be careful. So let's do a quick example here. If I have 3 minus 2 times absolute value of x minus 5 is equal to negative 7. Okay, well, first of all, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't even care, actually, that there's a negative right here. Okay, you should not even care, because we're not done. We haven't isolated that absolute value. So if you remember, the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to isolate this. I am not going to touch that. If you touch it, it's wrong. So what we're going to do is, the first thing, and please do not do 3 minus 2. That's like really, really bad. This is like saying 3 minus 2x equals negative 7. It's the same idea. The first thing you're going to do is always you do adding and subtracting. So I'm going to subtract 3 first from both sides. So I get negative 2 times absolute value of x minus 5 equals negative 10. Once again, we have not isolated that absolute value, so we can't make any conclusions that there's no solution. There is a solution. Well, just like this one, I subtracted 3, and I get negative 2x equals negative 10. And so your next step then is to divide both sides by negative 2. So that's what I'm going to do. And so they cancel. We get absolute value of x minus 5 equals positive 5. That's a good solution because now it's positive. And then I'm going to say x minus 5 equals 5, and x minus 5 equals negative 5. So add 5 to both sides. X equals 10. Add 5 to both sides. X equals 0. So there you go. Your two solutions are 10 and 0. And again, I can plug these back into the original problem. If I plug a 10 here, 10 minus 5 is 5. Absolute value of 5 is 5. And then 2 times 5 is 10. So 3 minus 10 is negative 7. Same thing with 0. 0 minus 5 is negative 5. Absolute value is positive 5. Times 2 is is 10. 3 minus 10 is negative 7. So those are your two answers. So just be very careful. One more quick example. If I have 2 minus absolute value of x minus 7 is equal to 8. Okay, so you subtract 2, and again, I'm going to put this little red box around here. You will never touch that until the very end. So we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. We get negative. Don't lose the negative. That belongs to that absolute value. X minus 7 equals 6. Okay, you are not done yet. We still have the negative, so it's like saying having a negative. It's like having this negative x equals 7. What do you do to both sides? You divide both sides by negative 1. So x equals negative 7. So same thing. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. Absolute value of x minus 7 equals negative 6. And at this point now, the absolute value is isolated. It equals a negative value. So the answer to this problem is NSB. No solution, baby. Okay? Anyway, so that is absolute value equations. And again, make sure you isolate the absolute value first. Then you set up a problem, the left side, or you set up a problem with it equal to positive and negative of that right side. All right, math fans, have a good day. Bye-bye.